All right. Hello, we're Team Interactive Academy, and this is our house presentation. This is our team. Our advisors are Shirley and Mo, and our clients are the Inanimate Dallas Research Group. So our project goal is to build a highly interactive experience for middle schoolers that sparks interest in STEAM subjects while leveraging lessons from the educators on the Inanimate Dallas team. We're providing examples, prototypes for the Inanimate Dallas Research Group in the future, as opposed to making a completed product. We're putting on an equal focus on narrative and literacy, as well as game moments such as puzzles that are meant to be a bit more interactive. We're making an experience that is just more than just a game. We're presenting STEM knowledge in a fun way through puzzles and indirect controls that make students get over their fear towards STEM, but we're not teaching STEM. So, what is Inanimate Dallas? It is an ongoing digital novel that uses interactive multimodal fiction. It relates to the experience of aspiring game designer Alice and her imaginary friend Brad in episodes, journals, and other digital media. Our clients look to branch out Inanimate Dallas into the STEM field as there is high-level economic interest and more students gaining STEAM skills. Retaining the original immersive literacy approach while teaching STEM is a unique proof of concept. We decided to teach STEM through game development, which encompasses a number of STEAM subjects. Based on our pitch and research, we decided to go for the kinesthetic learning approach, which emphasizing learning through doing and focused on teaching game development through game-like moments. However, game development is an extremely broad topic, so we decided to focus on creating 2 chapters that focuses on computer science as well as texturing. An intro and overworld is used to bridge the chapters. Our experience will happen in between episode 5 and 6 in terms of timeline. Our metrics matrix are client requirements, innovation, and gameplay/interactivity. Next, I'll hand it over to Lawrence, who will talk about design process.
Thanks, Karen. So to start, we looked at related work in the field, such as the previous episodes from the Inanimate Dallas series. We also looked at titles like Oregon Trail and Physicus, which bring classroom lessons to life, games like Minecraft and Code Spells, which utilize more of a sandbox approach for their content, and finally, things like Alice's Adventure in Scratch were instrumental in helping us design puzzles revolving around coding and programming concepts. When it came to quarters, we received a lot of feedback and appreciate everyone that was able to take the time to come visit us. Scope was a big concern, and as such, we cut down our number of chapters from 3 to 2 to focus more on how we're delivering the content as well as polish. Leaning on frameworks given to us by our client, as well as design frameworks such as the transformational one to help lower barriers for students to feel more comfortable with STEAM subjects, allows us to create a little bit more of a map in how we're delivering said content. And finally, our documentation is going to be vital, not only in showing how we're achieving certain things, but also explaining why. Next, we're going to look at a short video highlighting our experience thus far. To other Inanimate Dallas episodes, utilizing UI elements to guide the player in advancing the story when they are ready. In this story, Alice is transferring data from her old device to her new one when something goes wrong. She goes into her device and enters a world where she must find her digital friend Brad. Each microchip represents a chapter of content. The player explores the space using the mouse and clicks on objects to interact with them. We see the computer is locked. However, an access card is close by. When the player clicks on specific items, they go to the inventory bar for later use. Alice's observations appear on screen to provide context as well as subtle hints. After exploring, the player sees an interesting cube. This is a code block, the main piece of this chapter. Code blocks contain bits of code that the player can input into the computer to advance. After inserting the code blocks in the correct order, a new puzzle appears. This is portrayed as a standard jigsaw puzzle, but some pieces appear to be missing. Exploring further, certain objects transform into the remaining pieces, or mind fragments. A pixelation effect is used to amplify the digital nature of the world as the objects transform. Completing the puzzle, the player will be shown a new puzzle with new challenges. So when it came to some design decisions, we landed on a 2D first-person point-and-click game like you saw. This has numerous parallels to the Inanimate Dallas series, not only in the main mechanism of using the mouse to interact with the world, but also in the intimate first-person player perspective. The RICS framework given to us by our client, which stands for Read, Imagine, Create, and Share, is ingrained in a lot of the interactive moments in our experience, especially since we're leaning so heavily on text. And finally, game development concepts such as programming logic and textures as chapter topics are an engaging way to draw out STEAM parallels. When it comes to the narrative, we saw some key moments in the video, specifically the inciting incident in which Alice's new mobile device gets corrupted during a data transfer. Not only are her files lost or broken, but her digital friend Brad, who she's been with since the beginning of the series, is lost as well. Obviously, we're taking a lot of influence from inanimate Alice's style, not just in the primary characters of Alice and Brad, but also in the general ambiguity of the work. This leaves holes open for students to kind of dig through and explore on their own, talk with their classmates, and come to some of their own conclusions. In short, we're looking to emulate this style, not straight copy it, in order to pave a new story forward for Alice and others to experience. Now, our experience is taking place during a very transitional period in Alice's life. She's 17, she's on the verge of graduating high school, and there's a juxtaposition going on of moving forward with your life versus looking back at the past and going down memory lane, as it were. This is not only seen in the objects Alice interacts with, which are all from past episodes, but also in her observations of said objects. And finally, there's an equivocation here that Alice's goals in the digital world echo her ambitions in the physical world in the sense that she wants to use her game dev knowledge to, quote, build a better world for herself. Next, Jamie will talk a little bit about the tech side.
Thank you, Lawrence. Chapter 0 is a prologue of our story. It involved the content from Alice receiving a new player to diving into the digital world to use all of her game development knowledge to fix and find Brad. Chapter 0 is narrative heavy, so therefore point-and-click technique is implemented to make narratives move forward. For example, as you can see in these pictures, after the text fades into the scene, an arrow-like button shows up for clicking and then move next. And we also made some of the elements in Chapter 0 interactable. For example, in order to make the data transfer between these two players, children need to click on them separately, and a status window will pop up on the player for this click feedback. We also added some virtual effects to make the story more vivid and understandable, including glitch effect during the data transfer failure and the dissolve effect when Brad goes missing. And talking of our world, it's designed at the circuit board of the new player. 3 black processors represent 3 chapters. So in one puzzle can make some of the wires connect to the center processor, which is the main power to run the player. When all the puzzles are solved, the center processor will run successfully, which means Brad is back into function. When children first get into it, only chapter 1 is unlocked. They can click on the flashing processor to enter this chapter with puzzles. So now I'll hand to Rongjia to talk about some more details.
Thanks, Jamie. So as Jamie mentioned, chapter 1 will start after clicking on the first processor. Unlike chapter 0, chapter 1 is focusing on puzzles, where puzzle building is one of the most important parts. Each puzzle is composed by clickable and draggable elements. Some objects in a game world can be collected and put into the inventory, while some are static items like furniture. Clicking them will bring players to another view or continue the story. In most point-and-click puzzle games, inventory is a recurring theme. Guests can check all the items that they have collected and use them to solve puzzles. We also added an inspector to the inventory to show details and give hints. Narrative is essential to storytelling. To keep players engaged in this digital world, we rely on dialogues and texts. When guests are clicking on something, Alice will either explain it or hint at the next step. Also, as a main feature, guests can chat with Brad after fixing the corrupted device, which is mainly made up with dialogues. Our deliverables are very likely to be used by our client's dev team later, so our tech team has been trying to make our handoff as structured and readable as possible. First, we're using abstractions to keep the code structured. Second, to keep our project clean and extensible, we're trying to apply useful and meaningful design patterns like singleton, observer, and state. Last but not least, we have been using Unity editor extension, keeping our code clean and commented as drafting documentation. Next, Saili will talk about the art progress and iterations.
Thank you, Rongjia. For the visual style of this experience, we wanted to go with something that draws from the previous episodes of Inanimate Alice. We noticed that most of the imagery had very tinted undertones of green, red, and brown. We wanted to retain this emotion, but also find a way to ingest digitalness into our world. We fused our digital color palette with the Inanimate Alice color palette style that we thought would be a relatable reflection of Alice's tone within a backseat player world. We also adapted the softer lighting from episode 5 to light our scene. We had thought of a 2D point and click, which meant we would want to cater to the following needs of the game: exploration with multiple camera angles, detail with lighting and quality, and a first-person perspective. Initially leaning towards 2D, we did a 2D illustration art test. Second, we did a 3D world, but with a 2D outlines test. Building on that, we removed the outlines and did a natural render of a 3D world test, which we felt catered best to the requirements of our experience in the following ways. It was relatively more engaging and visually compelling. It offered more perspective experimentation. It gave us flexibility for rendering different camera angles. We could experiment with lighting, and it gave us world-building liberty both in terms of quality and time. The old Baxi player was inspired from the Baxi player seen in episode 5. We plan to make the newer design more sleek and sophisticated and reflect more digitalness to go in sync with the ambience of our game. Most of the background were dimly lit, therefore we went for lighter colors that would stand contrast with the scene navigation icons. The Chapter 1 world is the control room of Brad in the Baxi player. Essentially, for this style of the game, it is a user interface that should be clean, intentional, and expressive. We Bradified the room by placing all of Brad's artifacts throughout the episodes. There were multiple surfaces in the rooms, which gave us a good room for puzzle collectibles and interactables to be placed. The world had to be chaotic and corrupted. We planned to have solid colors for the environments, and the objects that served importance would have more level of detail. Lighting cues were used for indirect control. The main element of Chapter 1's first puzzle is the computer screen. Therefore, it was the most brightest area in the whole room, centered in between, so that the player immediately explores it. Multiple cameras were placed in the room for exploration. Code blocks were the pivotal elements of Chapter 1. We visualized code as digital information in form of bits, which when magnified look like tesseracts. Inspired by this, we built an emissive neon blue code block following our visual style. For the mind fragments, we envisioned them as jigsaw blocks with a similar emissive style seen for code blocks. Sherry will now talk about playtesting.
Thank you, Siley. Up until now, we've conducted 2 playtesting sessions with 11 middle schoolers aged 12 to 13. The difficulty ratings of the puzzles show a bell curve distribution with a peak in the middle, which was in line with our expectations. And in terms of how engaging the puzzles were, we also got a bell curve with a peak at 5 out of 7, and most of our playtesters showed interest in playing more similar games in the future. Despite the fact that our experience was incomplete, we think there's still room for improvement and will iterate on our design to make it more engaging. We also receive useful information from students' playtest survey responses and conversations with teachers. We receive responses like, I would add instructions for when you are in the escape office because I was not sure what to do, indicating that the usability of experience still need to be improved, and more hints and indirect control elements are needed to better guide them through the experience. But at the same time, we also got responses like, I'm more interested in STEM because now I want to make a cool game. From these responses, we can see that the kids seem to be engaged with the challenging puzzles in-game, and they became more interested in making games. This gives us the confidence that we are on the right track using game development concepts in game environment to spark their interest in STEAM subjects. Also, we've learned from the teachers that most of the students use Chromebooks, and they're not allowed to install any software that's not being approved due to safety concerns, which means our original PC build won't work on their Chromebooks. Therefore, we decided to upload the WebGL build on simmer.io so that our playtesters can easily access it in the browser. However, there might be some potential risks of using WebGL. Some visual effects and interactions can be problematic. So currently, we're still using WebGL build only for the playtesting before doing enough research and officially switching to WebGL build. So here's our future plan. We'll finish basic functionalities of Chapter 2 by the end of week 11 and spend another 2 weeks polishing our experience according to the playtest feedback, as well as working on the documentation part. And finally, we'll wrap up everything and hand it off to our client before the last week. Special thanks to all the teachers, playtesters, and faculty members, especially John Belash, who has been generous in taking time to provide feedback and facilitate playtesters for us. So to summarize, we're a Team Interactive Academy. We're building a highly interactive experience for middle school students that sparks interest in STEAM subjects while leveraging lessons from the educators on the Inanimate Alice team. We're now open for questions.
One of the comments you said was that you're leaning heavily on text. And it's just interesting because you're dealing with middle schoolers who maybe don't want to read text for an interactive game. So can you talk about that contrast between your demographic and leaning heavily on text?
Sure. So one of the things that Inanimate Alice does as a multimodal fiction is utilize text as the main way to deliver the story. There are images, but the backbone of it is delivered on text. We wanted to include this in our experience as well, not only to tie into the previous episodes of Inanimate Alice and its style, but also to push more on reading literacy and comprehension, which is a big part of our clients' expectations. So to that end, we're trying to bridge that gap of interactions fuel the text, and thereby text can also fuel what you want to do in terms of interactions, and trying to have it as much of a symbiotic relationship as possible.